Thank you guys so much for coming. Welcome to Voices 2026 inaugural event, European Competitiveness 2 years after the Draghi Report in collaboration with LUSDA. This panel will explore how to measure structural change and identify the right indicators for Europe's transformation, whether competitiveness and sustainability can be reconciled in a global context marked by less regulated markets and which institutional reforms are necessary to strengthen integration and economic resilience. Our illustrious speakers will also address the risks Europe is facing in an increasingly fragmented international order, the strategy required to bridge gaps identified in the Draghi Report, the role of international cooperation, and the long-term demographic challenge. We are living in a critical time in Europe's history, with threats on the horizon across the globe and internal communitarian issues that Europe can and should govern. Europe faces existential questions, and we are collectively gathered here today to find the best answers. We're very lucky to have the guests with us today, with Professor Manfredi Valeriani as moderator for our event. Sadly, due to last-minute complications, the Honourable Claudia De Vincenti will not be joining us today. I would like to just take a moment to thank Voice and LUSDA's team for making this panel a reality, especially Tiziano Siniscalchi, Anna Bonotto, Matthew Morone, Federico Viscaletti, Nicolo Rotondi, and Benedetta Rovella, which I will speak shortly. You have all displayed an exceptional amount of determination and resilience despite the numerous unexpected obstacles we have encountered. I'd like to also take a moment to thank la Dottoressa Calandrelli for her continued support of Voice. And finally, maybe the most important, I'd like to extend our gratitude to our sponsors, Unipol Urban Up, for powering this panel and making today a reality. Thank you for being with us today, and thank you, Benedetta.
Good evening, everyone. It is a pleasure to welcome you all here today. My name is Benedetta Rovella, and I'm the president of LUSDA, Louisian Diplomatic Association from Louis University, based here in Rome. So on behalf of our association, I would like to thank our speakers and our moderator who have taken time off their busy schedules to be here with us today. And I would also like to thank our colleagues from Voice for their commitment in making this event possible. As for the topic of the conference, 2 years after the Draghi Report, we're no longer discussing theoretical recommendations. I believe we're more discussing concrete political choices. So the questions we need to ask ourselves are, has Europe moved fast enough? Have we translated vision into action? And last, I would say that most importantly, what still needs to be done to ensure that the European Union remains, or perhaps becomes, resilient, dynamic, and forward-looking. So by answering this question, I really hope this conference will inspire us to think ambitiously about Europe's future. Because at the end of the day, being competitive for the European Union is about vision, about leadership, and the role our generation will play in what comes next. So again, thank you all for being here.
Okay, can we start? Is everybody connected, and can you hear us properly also in the room? I mean, it's a small room, maybe you don't need a microphone. Okay, well, or maybe yes, oh, that's okay. Good evening everybody. As the two honorable presidents have already introduced the works of this evening, I'm really honored to be here and to have this chance of moderating. I mean, for a political scientist, this is a very hard job of moderating different economists. But I will try my best to do that, also in the spirit of the conjunction that you were saying before about the two different associations that are bringing together this event. So it's indeed timely. Unfortunately, this topic, the topic of youth competitiveness that has come back together with the Draghi Report, has been somehow timely for a very long time now. We have been discussing this for some years. And everything has worsened with the two most recent crises that Europe had to face. COVID-19 on the one end, and right after the Ukraine crisis. From a more kind of political and strategic perspective, Europe has come to these two crises quite unprepared in terms of the foresight that has led to the two crises. It hasn't seen, it was not prepared, it has managed to react to to the two crises, but at the same time, these two crises have proven the vulnerabilities that the institutional and political arrangements that the EU is based on might face into this challenge. We also had, these were the two crises that we discussed. I should focus a little bit more, but this comes after two other crises that before that were faced. 2016, Brexit on the one hand, a vulnus for the heart of Europe, in which we lost a member state, and at the same time, the same year, the election of Donald Trump that has started to make multilateralism somehow crumble. The very spirit on which the EU was based started facing challenges. Everything heightened then with COVID and Ukraine. Today, the system has not changed. The Ukraine crisis is still present, and at the same time, Trump has come back. Now, besides the political value of Trump's election in the US, what it means for the EU is yet another challenge, for which this time we should have been prepared. But again, there might be the risk, as also shown by the Draghi Report, of the fact that once again Europe might have to react before acting or even foreseeing potential crisis. Now, the report in itself and many of the declarations that have followed since the release of the report and even the last discussions and declarations and speech that Mario Draghi has given are to somehow reawaken the EU and to try to propose also probably alternative institutional arrangements that could help out the EU to be better equipped for next year's challenges. And the sense of this will start to be discussed. So I don't know if Professor Giovannini is connected.
He's scheduled to connect at 45. So
okay. Okay. So probably we can start with discussing about. So I would probably start with Dr. Romano, that is here, responsible for industrial projects and international initiatives at Cassa Depositi and Prestiti, and probably I will start from this consideration while we wait also then to move more on sustainability and intersect with competitiveness, and I would like to ask whether or not the institutional conditions, whether or not there are certain aspects in the EU itself that today appears to limit the capacity of being competitive on the side of the EU.
Thank you. This was not the question that was.
No, it was. I later
I'm joking. No, let me start by saying saying something about what you said about the starting point of this crisis. I think that you mentioned correctly that Trump's shock in 2016 was a major event also for Europe, but I would say that it's not Trump itself the shock. The shock is that in the first 2 decades of the last century, we have seen an increasing asymmetry in the economic and trade relationship between Western Bloc, US and Europe, Japan as well, and China. And what happened with Trump is that this topic became an issue of national security for the US, and that's why it became so evident and explicit in the US agenda. But the fact that it is not Trump itself is that when the Biden administration came into power, the same approach of the US policy towards China did not change at all. Actually, it became even more active because with Biden, what we observed is that it was not just about tariff, it was also about active industrial policy for reindustrialization of the US. And so, again, Trump too, even more aggressive, but I think that there is a clear path that the US is following since 15 years. Actually, the first signals that something was changing was already under under Obama. And so this was a real awake for the EU. And what the Draghi Report has stressed is first, I would say, the first and more relevant issue for us is that its decarbonization strategy, this is the core of the EU Green Deal, which was the big priority in the policy agenda of the EU Commission in the last years had to be realigned with the topic of competitiveness. So we do not want to give up our ambition to become decarbonized and so to reach the targets of decarbonization in 2015, but we have to be honest, not naive, and to understand that decarbonization strategy has to be realigned with industrial policy, industrial priorities. And I think that we can learn from previous examples and mistakes done in the EU, like in the automotive industry, but I think that the same problem applies for any sector which is facing a paradigm shift, is that if you want to remain competitive in this current scenario, you have to align demand-side policies and supply-side policies. Instead, what we have done in the past years as Europe is that we have pursued, especially our decarbonization strategy, only on the demand side. So basically using a buy strategy. We bought green technologies from the market, ignoring the fact that technologies in the market were actually made in China in most of the cases. And this has created not only a problem in terms of economic sustainability of this transition, but now with this geopolitical fragmentation, also a problem of geopolitical sustainability. So I would say that even before the geoeconomic fracture that we're experiencing nowadays, there was already a problem of misalignment between demand and supply, which was making this transition hard for the European economy. But now, with the geopolitical fragmentation, is even more urgent to think about what can the EU supply by itself, what can the EU supply by relying like-minded partners, because of course we don't want to build autarky, an autarkic system, but we need to diversify also our sources of inputs and technologies, but we have to put this at the center of the agenda, of the debate. I think that what Mario Draghi has done, among many other things, is to put this topic in the discussion.
Well, thank you very much. I agree on many different grounds, and I think this is at the core of the discussion also today when we discuss about competitiveness within the EU, but also compared to a strategic outlook that the EU should have in the next and following years. What you highlighted is indeed very correct in the energy transition, for instance, the fact that we are relying extensively on products imported from China, which, as you highlighted, is okay during stable times in which, of course, the international system is open to exchanges, but then when the US ally constantly, as you highlighted across the different administrations, keeps on asking for more nationalist and strategic approaches, of course this become a huge issue. So I've seen that Professor Giovannini, economist and former Minister for Work and Social Policies, is connected. And probably I would like to also ask him in terms of whether or not sustainability, as we have intended so much and so far in Europe and the international level, in terms of, for instance, the UN SDGs, it's something that is still valid, and if it is something that can go hand in hand with a new approach to competitiveness in the EU.
Thank you very much. Good evening, and I apologize for being late, but I had to finish my course on sustainability to students of Tor Vergata, and they put a lot of questions, so I couldn't really stop it. Thank you very much for the invitation, and I'm very glad to share with you some views about the topic that you are discussing, and in particular to answer your question. First of all, I would like to remind all of us that to read the Article 3 of the European Union Treaty, which says that the aims of the Union is to promote peace, well-being, and the values of its peoples. And then lists almost all sustainable development goals. And as the treaty was written well before the 2030 agenda agreed by UN countries in September 2015, this tells us that the 2030 agenda is a product mainly of Europeans, and we should be proud of it. And if you start saying we don't care anymore about them, people have to recognize that they should change the treaty. I want to be a little bit blunt because maybe everybody has read the Draghi's report, skipping the introduction, where Draghi clearly says competitiveness is a mean to an end. And the end is to fully satisfy, first of all, implement the EU treaty and live well within the planetary boundaries in a safe environment, applying the concept of social justice and so on and so forth. And this is what happened. I think that most people, after reading quickly the introduction, then they focused on the different elements of competitiveness, just to say, oh, we should be doing this, this, and that. Second point I would like to make is that the concept of competitiveness today is fundamentally wrong, as it is measured through existing statistics. And just to give you an example, a very widely used as an indicator of competitiveness, the unit labor cost is a nonsense now that the entire production function can change through new technologies. The indicator of unit labor cost, which is the cost of labor divided by productivity, was developed when the assumption was that production functions are quite stable over time. But today, with renewables, with circular economy, with digital transition, the production function can change and is changing very dramatically. Therefore, using an indicator that was based on an hypothesis that simply doesn't fit with the reality is a nonsense. What we should be measuring is the ratio between total costs and the value added, not just labor cost, which is today about 25% of the total costs. Of course, this varies across sectors, but this is just to say that the statistics and the logic that we are using to assess competitiveness are really outdated. The third point I would like to make, and this takes me also back to the introduction of the Mario Draghi's report, but also to the speeches given recently, last week, by Isabel Schnabel, the director of the European Central Bank for supervisory body, the stability of the banking sector, and even by Christine Lagarde a few days ago to Wall Street Journal, if I'm not wrong. What they are saying in these speeches fits perfectly with what Martin Wolf wrote on the Financial Times after the publication of the Draghi's report. He said, yes, indeed, from a purely economic point of view, Europe is lagging behind the US. But if you look at a wider concept of well-being, Europe is performing much, much better than US. Therefore, we shouldn't forget that the balance between some elements of the very important some elements of our well-being, the economic ones, should be read together with the other elements of well-being. And Schnabel very clearly describes the several domains where Europe is much better than the United States, then saying, of course, in some elements of competitiveness, we are lagging behind. Which dimensions of competitiveness are we lagging behind? This is the other question that we should discuss, because it's quite really, I would say, funny that while we say that we are not competitive, President Trump puts tariffs because of the very large deficit that US has vis-à-vis Europe in terms of exchange of goods. So in terms of goods, Europe is very competitive. Where it is not competitive is on the services sector, which of course is extremely important and needs to be improved in several respects. And the other element where Europe is not competitive, as Letta's report clearly said, is that we are not so good in attracting European funds to invest in European activities. Because the money that look for profits go elsewhere looking for higher profits, and this is particularly true in the digital world and the digital sector or other very innovative dimensions that where other countries and especially US are performing well. So what I'm trying to argue here is that we should be very careful when we risk to generalize some conclusions that are relevant for specific sectors or other points, and then we say everything goes wrong. Let me add quickly 3 points. The first one is energy. For sure, we are facing much higher energy costs than other world blocs, and in particular US. But we know that we could reduce this very clearly through renewables that help also to increase our strategic autonomy, as normally people say, without reducing the exposure to fluctuations of oil price, which drive all the other energy costs. So in that case, the solution is very clear. We should speed up, not slow down, the transition to renewable energy, not increasing LNG imports, for example, from United States, because LNG, the gas that we import now through ships from US, is the most costly source of energy. So if we want to take down the prices, why are we investing on the most costly fossil fuel source? The second point I would like to make is that, in this respect, is that competitiveness is not only an issue of relative prices. It's much more than that. And the regulatory aspect of this is extremely important. And we know that Europe suffers of excessive regulations, but this responsibility is shared by European legislators and especially national legislators, as Letta's report clearly describes. But let me comment here on the very stupid thing that we are doing right now. Europe, as European Union, doesn't have fiscal capacity beside the very small European budget, operated and is operating mainly through regulation and regulatory power. Over the last few years, a lot of regulations and strict regulations were imposed to the private sector, including the regulations on business reporting, in order to show the so-called externalities, negative externalities that the economic activities produce in terms of CO2 emissions and pollution and so on. I would like to underline that in Europe we have 300,000 deaths, premature deaths, every year due to pollution. So it's a war, okay? Every single year, 300,000 people die. Now, through these new rules, especially for reporting, we try to push external competitors from China, India, US, to follow the same rules that we imposed to European firms. And now that China and other Asian countries are imposing the same standards to their own businesses, exactly to be able to compete and export to Europe, which is the largest economic market in the world, what do we do now? We cancel them. We reduce them dramatically. This is really a stupid thing. I'm not saying that nothing had to be changed. A lot of simplifications had to be done and could be done, but the overall strategy sold, especially to European public opinions, as a way to gain competitiveness is far from being true. European Commission has published two figures. The first for the first so-called omnibus for simplifications on environmental reporting directives, or actually sustainability directives, and the second on other things. Their benefits, estimated by them, was equal to 8 billion euros, and then another 8 billion euros. You could say, well, big number. But if you made it relative to the overall intermediate costs of European companies, is the 0.01% of total costs. Do you really mean that doing that, our competitiveness explodes? That we solve all the problems in doing that? Of course, it's not true. It's simply not true. So competitiveness, and this is my last point, depends on very important things, and especially depends on investments, private and public investments. And this is where, as we say in Italian, our arm becomes very short. At European level, countries, including Italy, are overall against the creation of common debt. Of course, Italy is not the only one, but Germany and others have objected very strongly to this kind of enlargement. Italy is now a little bit in between, but how this money should be used, just to redistribute money to member countries as we did it with Next Generation EU, or to run truly European projects that would increase dramatically the scale of European champions. And this is the other division, the other very clear oppositions that some countries have in all different domains. So as you can see, it's good that we talk about competitiveness. We should use new indicators, different, better indicators to assess competitiveness. We should distinguish between goods and services, protected sectors and free sectors, and so on and so forth. And we shouldn't forget that competitiveness depends mainly on the capacity of being innovative and also play on the same rules, as I mentioned before, with regulatory power and reporting rules. So it's much more complex than what we normally read on the newspapers, or we listen during the talk shows. But it's a very serious agenda. It must be done seriously with a forward-looking perspective, and not just selling as great results peanuts, such as the regulatory savings that I was talking about. I stop here for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor. So many different things to reflect about. And I would also like further into our conversation to investigate more about indicators, which become, of course, a central aspect of measurement in the policy process. Then being capable of measuring results is crucial. And I would like to see later if there is a European space in itself to define these indicators compared to what maybe other countries would propose. But I would like now to move first a little bit with Dr. Pacciani, which is chief risk, has been is former chief risk officer at the European Stability Mechanism, and today head of research at Post, among other things. And Dr. Pacciani, I would like to ask you, like Professor Giovannini has given us a comprehensive understanding of the current status, also of the definition of competitiveness in itself, and how the EU is actually not in such a hill condition as it might seem sometimes from the general discussions and from newspapers reporting themselves on the report also. So I would like to ask you what's in the end, whether or not the EU has certain challenges besides the common understanding of competitiveness. We are constantly exposed to discussion on the demographics, on the unstable growth. We are seeing changing in the equilibrium of growth across different countries. We are seeing now Germany slowing down, Italy is probably surviving better off than Germany, but most of the times because Germany is slowing down rather than because Italy is doing good. So what's the current status actually of the EU, and what could be the current challenges?
Thank you very much. First of all, I hope you can hear me well.
Yes.
Because I'm in a kind of shelter in Cambridge and coming back to Rome. First of all, I'd like to thank you for the invitation to speak today. I would like to start with first of all, with a lot of sympathy with what Professor Giovannini was saying about the fact that somehow there is a narrative out there about Europe, the condition of the European economy, that doesn't reflect, as also put by him, but also by Schnabel, this amazing speech he did recently. There is quite a lot in which Europe, I think, is doing well at the moment. Is doing well in a context in which, for me, is a real basis on which the Draghi Report and Data Report were created. They were written in a moment in which a war started in Europe. So we cannot forget the fact that in Europe we are at war. There is a war in Ukraine, there is a war on the borders of the Baltics and Poland. And somehow I think we need to reflect on that, I think, as a point. And I will show you after some interesting evidence that we started digging with my team, precisely looking at productivity, because until we don't realize that we are in a situation in which a lot of stuff is weaponized, the word is used a lot these days, weaponized against Europe, we're not going to move on, I think. And for me, the Draghi report and also the later reports is a call to arms somehow, even to find arms and weapons, because we need them to build our own defenses in a moment in which the Holy Alliance with the US through NATO seems to be, let's say, at least some kind of transition phase. We don't know where it's going to head. And so I would like to start from here. I think that I think the Draghi report and the data report and the way in which the Commission is interpreting the role of the moment is like building, let's say, a nearly war economy. You imagine we need to build defenses, we need to be able to face an enemy that's not using only the troops, but it's using also its information, it's using any possible meaning to attack Europe. Trade is another one. I'm not talking about the usual enemies that we imagine, especially. I think China, they have the best interest to cooperate and work with Europe effectively. And I would like to say something at the end about soft power. I think is a key and growing element in a narrative on China. So if you look at the numbers, I think you mentioned before Germany. Germany, at least they had a big capacity, or let's say, or energy to start spending again for infrastructure, for investments. If you look at the latest data from Germany, you can see a blip of growth in the economy that I think is indicating that whatever they started to put and invest on is start to provide some growth. It's important for the rest of Europe because Italy lives to some extent next to Germany in terms of the economy, especially the SMEs. Somebody mentioned before the automotive, yes, it looks like a nearly lost battle, but at the same time, we need to remember that we're still an important market for producers. And I always say that the common friend I have with Enrico Giovannini, which argue often, Edoardo Nesi, the writer, is always discussed about the fact a lot of people relocated to China. I may also expect at some stage there could be a relocation for production because of costs towards some European countries. So from this point of view, I think that we are in a position in which the Draghi report is really this call to arms. It's call to arms in a moment in which Carney, they find that we are living through a fracture. It's a fracture on a global trade, on a global politics, in which it looks like everybody has to take against sides. But there is something that Carney said before mentioning the fracture. He said that we should stop living in times of nostalgia. And it's another important element for me because somebody before mentioned foresight and hindsight. I've been through most of this crisis on the first line, and Royal Bank of Scotland with the financial crisis, on the Euro crisis, ESM, on the energy crisis again. And some of them were events you cannot foresight, but you could prepare for. And for me, the way in which Europe addressed some of this crisis is a handbook material. Because I was there during the big financial crisis, during the Euro crisis, and I believe that the answers that were provided, they were fast, effective, and allowed the system to survive and to take us as of today. So if you look, I think at what is maybe missing, what are the issues around, or what still does allow to see the effects or ideas around the Draghi report. And the report is nearly 2 years old. We're still waiting for the Commission to produce the new multi-year financial plan. But there is a lot of emotion. There's a lot of emotion in relation to how Professor Giovannini was saying before, how to finance this. And the only way to finance all the investments we need to do could be trans-border investments, could be any kind of infrastructure investments. I think it's through a common debt. I think we need to start talking seriously about to have a Eurobond or Euro debt. The ESM and also the Commission, they created the basis, but if you compare the amount of bonds issued by the Commission, the ESM, if compared to let's say the BTP of the world and the American Treasury, they're still very small numbers compared to what you will need to use these assets not only to finance yourself, but also to become, let's say, the new, using the risk management term, the new risk-free world. So if you look at this aspect, I think there's quite a lot to do. If you look at other aspects like reforms, again, there is this kind of a mixed bag of reforms that still end up waiting to be implemented. The capital market, what now is called the Savings and Investment Union. There is a need to, I would say, to coordinate better, especially a lot of, of areas, especially in relation to new technologies, because it's really where we may risk losing the war completely. And but I think it's quite a lot also to, I would say, to be happy about where Europe is heading. I would like to show you an example using some tables, take them with, as we see, they say, the Romans were saying with cum grano salis, because it's still a draft of work we do with my team. I'm very happy to share them if I find a way. Can you see them?
Yes.
Okay, no, I think the work we are doing here, starting from what Professor Giovannini was saying, is not I listen to him, but it's something that maybe we started looking at productivity in Europe and US. I started to dig a bit further down the line of what makes this idea that in Europe the productivity is lower than US so strong and so diffused all around. So also because we want to understand few things. First one, if it's true, if it's true, what is driving the productivity gain in US versus Europe, and if in Europe you can see differences across the spectrum in the countries, and what are the drivers? One of the drivers you will see, and I will show an example where for me in Europe we have a very good lesson that we can learn from a specific country, which is not only Eurozone. So what we look here, sorry, is a very small, and it's still a mix of Italian and English, because we wrote it in Italian but translated in English, so maybe it's good for Cavour University, because I'm sure that people there, they also want to learn Italian. As you can see, we don't use Google Translate for the slides, but what we look here, we look at the GDP in the US, and you can see a percentage of USA GDP, and also against the real productivity per employee. And if you look at the red dots, I hope you can see them. You can see a specific member states in US, which are California, New York, Washington, and Massachusetts. These are precisely the countries with the highest level of productivity per employee, where there is a high percentage of, on the right side, the weight of GDP of origins from information companies, of information services. And why we want to show that? We want to show that because for us there is a very important lesson. If you look at the rest of the states, apart from maybe Texas, is that kind of moving towards the big four in terms of productivity. It tells that obviously there is a big impact in the states on productivity as in the states where the percentage of investment technology is very, very high. So California, Washington State is where Microsoft is, where Amazon is, where Starbucks is, so maybe there's a correlation also with coffee, and they stay awake for longer, where Boeing is, and where the biggest important defense companies are. So I think this tells you a story. If you translate this analysis to Europe, I don't want to go too much into detail. You see, if you look at the same analysis for Europe, you have a similar example where we have here, you can see that a lot of countries, but the difference is that in the US, the biggest productivity or the highest productivity is in the biggest countries. In Europe, the highest productivity is in the moderately smaller countries. If you look here, we have Germany, France, Italy, Spain, where the productivity per hour is lower, but they represent a big percentage of the Eurozone productivity. So what is the lesson we're learning? Well, here the outlier is Ireland, with a high productivity per hour if compared to the rest of Europe. But you can see here there are companies like Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, I'm quoting them for a specific reason, that where there's a higher productivity. So where is this coming from? Well, we believe that this is coming again from the information technology investments, that they are stronger in those countries. So here there is a first, maybe not less, first area where maybe we should focus more to have I don't want to say to create the European language model, but at least to have the understanding that countries where the investments on innovation, technology, and education were higher, they benefited more than others. So it's a big lesson. When you look at where to address, where to send investments, it's innovation, but innovation also driven by the education system support of that. And if you look at the specific country which we had, let's say, a bit of fun with, which is Poland. Why we look at Poland? Because Poland is because here you have the Eurozone report, the productivity per hour worked by employee. If you look at Poland, if you look at the other countries in Europe, they're all like low. And then still you have Latvia and Lithuania. In the middle, the purple line is Poland. Poland is quite a big country. I think it's over 50 million inhabitants, one of the largest countries in Europe. They also had a similar situation than Italy, in the sense that in the last 20 years, they have an incredible brain drain. A lot of people left Poland to go mostly to the UK, where also I live too. And after Brexit, what happened, there was a brain gain. Everybody started moving back to Poland. They moved back to Poland with the addition that they learned English, that they were able to have experiences in UK or across Europe. So they brought back this kind of immigration auditor. Another element that Poland has is that Poland also benefited, it's terrible to say so because, it's a bad thing, but they also benefited by substantial immigration from Ukraine. They also, if you go to see the demographics of Poland, it's also altered their demographic distribution, because a lot of people that came away from Poland, from Ukraine, were the youngest, the families, and the people that were trying to escape. Obviously, some of them not to be listed in the army. But this combination created in last, since the war started, if you see, also peak in productivity in Poland again. It was starting to adjust and then peak again. This tells another story. Somehow there is an element of virtuousness in the Polish story. It's not part of the Eurozone, but in which a different set of elements, they benefited a lot, the American states. The red dot states, California, Washington State, Texas too, is still there. It's still not red dot, but it's getting towards the red dot zone, Massachusetts, because they benefited from talent, immigration, public investment on infrastructures, and also the capacity to use well to fund themselves in the market. So we started to look at Poland like an example of what could be a virtuousness out of the situation, which, as I said at the beginning, another element, all these countries, I mentioned Lithuania, Estonia, Poland, there are countries at the border of a country that may wage war with Europe one day. So they need to prepare not only defenses, but to have their own infrastructures, let's say, spot on, to be able to withstand any potential risk. And I'm saying that because recently I went to Warsaw. I want to say one of the things that maybe not really economic material, but I think it's important to understand the context. I went recently to Warsaw, and in front of the cathedral, there are two shops of military apparel. Imagine if in front of the one in Milano, instead of Prada, you have a shop, 3-story shop selling only overalls for camouflage and for war. So the sense that there is there of emergency and urgency, but also to have an economy is able to withstand and prepare for a potential conflict, maybe is also a driver for the economy. Then we go back to the point I was saying at the beginning, that for me the sense of human urgency of the Draghi report is precisely that one. It's telling us you need to prepare for not for only the physical war, but a series of wars can be waged against you. One is a currency war, because the euro now is appreciated a lot against the dollar. If you look at the history, the colleague before mentioned the first Trump. If you look at the FX rate, euro-dollar, in 2016 and now, the rate just is following the same curve. If you take any Bloomberg, you can look at, it's quite astonishing. So when Trump went in power, for the first year and a half, the euro-dollar trade followed the same line that's following now, and it peaked at 1.26. So it's still a bit away from that. So there is also that kind of war waged against Europe, which is with the currencies. And the other one is about trade, where I think what, for example, Canada is doing, also European Union is doing, is quite clever, is to try to find agreements with India, with China, in order to create, let's say, a counter narrative to the fact, to this kind of, let's say, extreme volatility or volubility, I mix in Italian and English here, some extent of Trump in relation to tariffs. So I think for me the challenge of the Draghi Report launches is there, but we have lessons in Europe where we are learning a lot how to address these issues. And another one is to get ready from what Professor Giovannini was saying, for another weaponization of climate change, not from other agents, foreign agents, but from nature itself. Because I always say that it looks like the planet is trying to kind of get rid of ourselves. So we need to be ready for that, because also that requires substantial investments and attention. The last word I want to say is that often we depict China maybe as a dictatorship, etc. I start to have a slightly different view about it. There were two things that really struck me in the last few weeks. One, obviously, it is this freestyle champion, Chinese freestyle champion at the Olympic Games. If you listen to her, you know, it's really a little lesson in geopolitics and how Chinese people, they see success and failure and perseverance to obtain a result. There was a famous question from a journalist, oh, you're not happy to win a gold? And she provided the classic answer, yes, she provided another incredible answer in which she said, at the end, as an athlete, as a person, I want to be every day better than yesterday. And I wonder if in Europe, as a company, as a person, sometimes we ask ourselves the same question in order to improve what we're doing. The other one is maybe a bit more like a pop element, but struck me a lot, is that in a moment in which a lot of confusion in the US, there was I think was a big event in China, in which I think for the Chinese New Year, in which they did a showcase of robots. But that for me was not the most interesting thing. The most interesting thing is that they invited Lionel Richie, the singer, to sing together with Chinese and American artists you maybe myself I never heard of, We Are the World. So on that side of the world, I think there is a lot of investment and effort to create a soft power in China that is very similar to the American one of 20, 30 years ago. If you have kids, you know that all of them, they like starting moving Chinese products or Korean, etc. So for me, it's another point to take care is that the end growth and wealth also comes from the fact that you have a narrative around that. And the narrative I can see now coming out of China, it looks more European in terms of values to what I can see now coming out of the US. I don't want to be too close in a controversial note, but I hope I gave you some elements to discuss further.
Thank you very much. Yes, indeed, you gave us very good points to discuss, and I think probably we can go back in the room to discuss them. And so, I mean, we started with China to a certain extent with energy transition and the fact that there might be a challenge there when it comes to production and to expose ourselves strategically to China. But then, of course, during the discussion again, it came back that, well, the dimension of this competition we have with China, how much is driven by the US telling us or bringing us somewhere where maybe it's not convenient for the EU in itself. And this is just a broader discussion on what we see today in the international system of positive for the EU and what's not. We are seeing the US that are retreating from free trade agreements, and the EU that is approaching again the free market and is trying with different results. With Mercosur, it doesn't manage to close because of internal pressures. With India, it opens up discussions for other trade deals. So what's a good strategy today for the EU in this complex system? Opening up or following up maybe a more nationalist approach as the US is showing to us?
Again, this question was not agreed upon before, eh? No, it's a joke. Well, I think that I follow also what has been said before by esteemed colleagues. The future of Europe cannot be just closing the borders, and I already said that before. Look, I mean, having a protectionist attitude would be basically a suicide. We are a fully integrated economic system. We have highly competitive industries, and if we take the example of Italy, if you look at the growth dynamics of Italian exports, we are in the last 10 years we have the best performers after the US in the G7. So we are able to compete, and we also in this challenge in these difficult times. So I think that we should not react to this new scenario by just closing the borders, but we should become more pragmatic. I think that what Draghi says at the end, in a nutshell, is to not to sacrifice our values, our ambitions, to become also be at the forefront of sustainability, but to become more pragmatic, because the landscape in which our transition is occurring has changed. And I just would like to quote Draghi. It's just the only sentence I quote. But it says, in light of the global economy's evolution, one thing is now clear: no country which aspires to prosperity and sovereignty can allow themselves to be left out of the race for critical technologies. So the key issue, and that goes back to the first point I was making, is that if we want to be still be a continent which leads somehow and shapes somehow its future, we have to care about competing in key technologies in a way which is not passive. It's not just hoping that market dynamics by themselves will nurture European innovation capacity, because this, the recent year experience has shown, will not happen if other countries and geopolitical powers are competing with a broad set of policy instruments, from trade policy, industrial policy, and all innovation policies. As Europe, we should do the same. Of course, meaning adapting this policy instrument to our values, Professor Giovannini was saying, what are the values which inspires, democratic values which inspire our society, but we should be pragmatic, and so in a way expand the toolbox available to all of us. And I think that if we are pragmatic, means that we should select which nodes of the supply chains are critical for our sovereignty and also our security, and these nodes we may want to tackle them directly, building our own capacity, at least partially, and not just depend on 90% from China's imports because of the weaponization that was mentioned before of dependencies. But at the same time means to identify partners which share our values. Canada was mentioned before, Japan, Australia, Korea, but also think about Mercosur democracies, or maybe, I'm a bit more skeptical, India. They can be alternative sources of inputs, alternative markets for our exports, but we have to build cooperation with these countries, not just trade relations. We have to sign agreements, so we have to add to the economic dimensions also the geopolitical dimensions. That is what is largely lacking. Let me say, because probably I don't have time for the third round of questions, or at least I think I want to stress this, what are the risks I see? So I want to be optimistic, of course, but I have to be also realistic. And I think that despite the strong emphasis also of the European Commission towards the results of the Draghi agenda, if you listen, Draghi himself says that many of its recommendations have not been implemented so far. And why is it so? Because you see that even under the pressure of this international scenario, with a war on a border, a real war, an economic aggression from the US, a subtler but even also economic aggression from China through subsidized productions. So despite this, the urgency, there are still evident diverging economic interests across member states. And because of the governance of the EU, this creates basically that we are frozen in a debate which does not translate into action. And my view is that the problem is that some of this aggression, apart from the aggression of Russia, which of course is evident, which is an aggression which is a threat for all of us. But if you look at the US and Chinese challenge for the euro, it's clear in my view that this challenge is particularly severe for some countries, which are the manufacturing hub of the continent, so Germany, Italy, and France, but it's not a challenge at all for many small service-oriented economies. In the Northern Europe, so Scandinavia, Netherlands, Denmark. So there is a divergence also of interests. Not to say a country like Spain, which has never really become a manufacturing power, so which is exploiting the opportunity to attract Chinese investments in some of these technologies, but I would like to see whether these are high value investments or just a way to circumvent the European barriers, which in a way is acting also like a country like Spain in a very nationalistic way. So not considering the interest of the EU as a whole, but looking at national interests. And let me conclude by talking about. Oh, you want
Before
to?
you,
Yeah,
yes,
yeah.
because
Sorry.
I've been told that Professor Giovannini has to leave.
Okay.
So he's of course free to leave if he has to hurry or if he wants to add a final sentence. Just as you please, Professor.
Thank you very much. I have to leave, especially because they are closing this side of the university, so I would like to avoid to spend the night here. 2 points very quickly. The first one is that we shouldn't make the mistake that we made when we opened the world economy to China and others, thinking that the others were a little bit stupid. So they would have produced mass goods such as t-shirts, and we could continue to export high technology stuff to them. Of course, the world didn't work in this way, and on the contrary, we are now using high technology products coming from the rest of the world. Therefore, competition is not done just closing the borders, as we heard just a few minutes ago. I fully agree with you, but through investments in innovation. And the scale matters. This is something that we are learning. Beside what the industrial policy subsidized by government in China, the dimension, the size matters. And this is not the fault of China or fault of India. It's the fault of Europe, who doesn't learn this kind of message. And we can discuss about bureaucracy and so on, but the truth is that most European countries most European companies think small, and especially Italy, where we have a huge number of very small enterprises, and we are not benefiting from the size, which means economies of scale, but also the possibility of investing on new stuff. That is fundamental. The second point is, as it was correctly pointed out, we cannot at the same time celebrate the capacity of our companies, and particularly manufacturing companies, of being competitive, and then cry every single day because we are not competitive. These two things cannot get together. And the reason is very simple, that several companies who export are extremely competitive. And a lot of other companies, I'm talking about Italy, but not only, that produce for internal market are not competitive, period. And this dualism is dramatic for us and for others. From this point of view, one of the lessons I think that we learned through the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience is that, at least in the original description of the plan, we had to prepare ourselves for the next crisis. This is the meaning of resilience. And by the way, as I was responsible for that at European level, after 4 years of studies on this subject matter, I care very much about this. We have already forgotten the lessons that came from previous crises. We, let's say, face a new crisis as if that was the first one, while we have now a long record of crises, different, economic, financial, political, war crisis, health crisis, and the most relevant crisis that we are going to face is the climate one, where we are already in the midst of. And if you look at the Global Risk Report issued by the World Economic Forum, in 10 years' time, we will be in a huge mess due to that. And we are not investing as we should, both to protect ourselves from the climate change and to mitigate that. And this is where the future competition will be about. Look at a recent article from CNN about India. India is more based on renewables and electric, let's say, power economy compared to China at the same level of development. India is investing hugely in renewables because it's the cheapest way of producing electricity today, and is most coherent with the autonomous strategy A. And what are we doing, especially in Italy? We are slowing down the change. We are saying that we should postpone this kind of policies as, I don't know why, there are alternatives. This kind of short-sighted approach to policies is really incredible to understand, impossible to understand, and even incredible given what's going on around the world. So we have to keep in mind that the best way to protect our competitiveness and future competitiveness is to lower down the energy costs. And the only way to do it is, in a reasonable time, is through renewables. If we try to find other ways, or using, let's say, bonuses that could disappear in the next 2 months because of the expected rise in gas prices, we are really making a huge mistake and cheating people and companies. So I think that among the various things that we have to face, this is a fundamental from an economic point of view, from a social point of view, and especially from environmental point of view. And this is where the word competitiveness is about, because the entire world will try to go in this direction. The original idea of the Green Deal was exactly this one. I think that most people never read the Green Deal document in 2019. The idea was that if the world wants to have a future, has to invest towards sustainable economies. And if we have our companies on the frontier in this field, we will have an entire world where we can export. We are now in the other position, in the opposite situation, as we are not investing enough in this. But to do that, and I stop here, we need to think as Europe as a whole, and not just the sum of small countries. You know the story that Europe is made of small countries and countries who don't know that they are small. And this is really a problem that we are facing. Thank you again. I have to leave, unfortunately, and I wish you a great continuation of this great debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, also. Yes, thank you. And so I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it's
before,
okay.
but, I don't know if Dr. Pacciani also is still with us, or...
Yeah.
Yes, okay,
Yes.
so...
Yeah, yes.
I don't know if you wanna add a few things. We're going towards the closing of the section about the challenges, and also about I think that in the last two interventions here from the room and also from Professor, what came out is a little bit this pragmatic approach, that it's something also that Draghi in his latest speech has somehow defined the fact that, well, he was referring to pragmatic federalism, but to a certain extent to have a more pragmatic approach towards the challenges. Do you think, and do you see like space for this from a strategic perspective? What is the EU missing still after everything we have said, and what could be the next step from here?
Thank you very much. Well, I would say I will start from maybe using the first word is foresight. Somebody mentioned at the beginning this word with the idea, but I read it slightly different way. I come from a risk management, say, career and experience. For me, foresight is the capacity to have in front of you a series of potential scenarios and to be able to address each issue or challenge that come along, because you have at least an understanding of what could happen. And in the last 7 years, I think we pretty much we had any kind of challenge you could imagine, because there are wars, there are pandemics, we are having climate change events continuing. So we have a lot of things that are telling us that the world of tomorrow is going to be very, very different. So I think, I know that the Commission created a division dealing with foresight. There's a lot of talk, a lot of conferences these days around strategic foresight. But for me, is what I would define like the all good long-term thinking. So the idea is to say that whatever we decide today will have an impact and influence in generations to come at any level. And today is even bigger because we have new agents potentially around us. I mean, it's not only about society, it's also about technology, it's also about the planet itself, or climate change as a proper agent. I'm not saying that nature has a will or has an intention, but we need to start to think in that terms as well. I think, as Professor Giovannini was saying, climate change is one of the biggest issues, because everything is connected to that. It's connected because of the energy requirements, because of the big data center that will require AI, requires low temperatures, etc. So there is a lot of, let's say, so there's a foresight and correlation or connectivity. The fact that what I'm doing here may have an impact in some other sectors, some other countries, etc. So foresight for me is really what matters these days. To be able to address not only the issue that we have to scramble to resolve today, as we had, but we still have to, but also to start to devote a part of our energy and thinking and policies to really long-term thinking. Also because some of the challenges we have are long-term, like the demographic one. So the sustainability also of the financial system in terms of the pension systems across Europe, that let's say at least is a bit in doubt for the next in the next 20, 30 years because of the pyramid, demographic pyramid that in some countries like Italy is completely inverted. So these are big challenges. The other word is hindsight. Hindsight is always right. They say in England, pretty much when you look at the phenomenon from the past, on the past, you always find a solution is kind of exposed. But I believe there's a big value on trying to understand what happened in the past and how pretty much building our models and scenarios, it's pretty much the business, on the shocks of the past. And we had them, and we still have them, to build the resilience. So, for example, in terms of energy dependence on trade trends and patterns, and there's quite a lot there. I think in Europe, policy making, good old policy making, rather than scrambling to address the issues imposed on us by others. And I think what's was said before about the fact that Europe is a whole. If you look at the European Union, I know I grew up in a generation which for us, look about, I'm showing my age, but at the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s, especially when the UK joined, other countries joined Europe, was really a vision becoming reality. And this is for me where, not nostalgia, but the vision may come back and help us also to drive our decisions. And I'll give you two examples. I always have personal ideas, nothing to do with what I'm doing my daily job. But one is that we should start thinking at creating stuff on small and medium enterprises, etc., similar to the Erasmus project, so that we can cross-fertilize ideas and human capital, because thanks God we still have a lot of human capital in Europe. The other one is to appreciate more also the macro level. Recently I went on holidays near Biella, and near Biella is a kind of the old district of wool where the most let's say expensive wool was treated, still produced today by a group of producers. There's one, and there are others, and they built an amazing, a really amazing, I would say, project that is built to relieve the industry of the wool, but at the same time to build up on that one other services from tourism, skiing, I call it hospitality, but also to rebuild this kind of a small, let's say, the network of small medium enterprises and connecting them together. And for me, it was like an eye-opener of what you can do. A lot of this was also financed by European money, but was an eye-opener to see what you can do using the past to build something that's very, very interesting and attractive for the future. And I'm sure in Europe is full of areas like this. So pretty much you go for the macro level of the big decisions, the Eurobonds, the macro investments, to really understand how they change life of people, because at the end, we can talk about the environment, but for me the environment is also the social environment. The fact that we want to have stability and welfare for the Europeans, as we had it also for the next generations. So I think there are the kind of areas in which I think we can be more able to look at the future, but also learn also the lessons of the past, because we did a lot.
Thank you very much, and I totally agree. And the focus on foresight and being ready for many different futures possible, it's indeed a key to better times for the EU in terms of readiness and capacity to deal with future challenges. And I will go back here to Dr. Romano for some final remarks if there is anything that you feel like commenting on. I also took away a little part before, so if
No. I think that
we still have a few minutes before
just
maybe opening up for questions.
just one comment. Actually, Professor Giovannini speech was great because I introduced this concept of size matters. What I wanted to say, in fact, is that one of the recommendations of the Draghi, but especially the Draghi Report, is to complete the internal market. And I think this is key to compete with the US and China, where this internal market already exists and is fully integrated, and which allows Chinese companies, but also US companies, in one case more on the industry side, the other more on the service side, to reach the scale and so to mobilize the resources which is needed. However, I would like to add that lowering just the administrative barrier, completing the internal market will be necessary but not enough. We need a strong coordination of industrial policies across member states, considering that industrial policies is by treaty mostly in the competencies of the national government. So we cannot expect to have EU to take a leading role in building industrial policies because this is outside the scope of the treaties. So what we need, and this of course is a second best option, but this is pragmatic, is to strengthen the coordination. And I think that I want to leave with a good example of such a strengthened coordination are the important projects of common European interest. Probably are not very well known by most of the general public, but they are mentioned, if I'm not wrong, more than 50 times in the Draghi Report. And these are pan-European industrial projects on very innovative tech sectors which are deemed to be strategic for the EU, in which member states cooperate together to decide where to invest public resources together with private companies. So it's a really very good examples of cooperation across member states, but which is done in coordination with a strategy which is designed at the EU level, and where there is a public-private partnership, which is where resources can be more effectively mobilized.
Thank you very much. And I mean, we come to a conclusion of the discussion phase, and we open up the floor for a few more questions, maybe from the public. And yes, we have one here. Maybe we gather a few. Yes, one here, one back there, two back. Okay. Well, okay. We gather a few, and then we see also how we are with times. Please.
First of all, thank you. It was a very, very interesting discussion. I learned a lot. I have a question for Dr. Pacciani, especially on the graphs he was showing us, because there was a divergence between the larger countries and the Baltic states, Poland, and not to say that they aren't investing or innovating, but how much of the divergence can be explained because they started from a less developed economy, and how much of it can be explained by the current activities now? So more of a comparison, and how they take that into account with their statistical methodology.
Okay, one here, and then there was somebody back there. Yes.
I'll leave this open to both speakers, but to kind of preface, we saw after the invasion of Ukraine how gas and energy prices across Europe were kind of scrambled, and it caused real social problems for many years. And we saw the two different reactions that a country like Spain and a country like Italy had, where Spain kind of pushed more into renewables and really, I'd say, pushed really into renewables, let's say, and then Italy kind of just said, okay, we'll find new strategic importers like Azerbaijan and Algeria, and now who knows what's going to happen in the future with these countries because they're not as closely allied as maybe other countries in Europe. And so my question is, how can you, as on an EU level, account for the political risks of certain countries just not pushing together in the same direction, especially now with the rise of the AfD, with Vox, with reform in the UK? How can the EU manage this maybe more disjointed political climate?
Okay, well that's a 100 million euros question, but yes, I think the questions both, so I will leave the speakers in the order you prefer to answer. They touch upon two similar things. One is how we measure like differences and how about the methodology that Dr. Pacciani presented, and the other one is, okay, we are seeing different initiatives, different responses, how can the EU somehow systematize this, or at least take into account all these different preferences that manifest at the national level, which is something that you also kind of highlighted at a certain point. So
I will leave to Professor Pacciani both questions, which
maybe you can start. Yes.
yes.
Yeah, okay. First of all, apologies if the line may drop or be difficult because I'm in the middle of the countryside in the UK. But I'm using UK telephone, so it should be fine. No sound.
No, we lost you.
Of details and the methodology, I cannot share the slides now. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Yes, now perfectly.
Yeah.
No, I think we lost you. I think we lost you, so probably like we will go back to you and to the methodology of the study you presented and the slides. And
So you have to come up with a smart answer to this very complex geopolitical question.
yes.
Not about the methodology, I don't have an answer. What about finding a way? I don't have a solution, to be honest. I see, as you were mentioning, different reactions, which are the results of a lack of EU governance for this kind of processes. As long as this energy policy, industrial policy, foreign policies remain in the hands of national governments, and as far as there are diverging national interests, as I was mentioning, a solution at the EU level will not be attained. So, as you were saying, the energy is a wonderful example where there will be very clear benefits from cooperating and coordinating among member states, for instance, to buy gas or other sources or even oil all together and get better prices, but this is not what we are doing so far. And so I agree, there should be more integration to enhance also the geopolitical stance of Europe, I would say. But thus far, I think that this way, at least in 27 countries, is simply unattainable. And in fact, I'm not honestly, I'm not a geopolitical expert, but I'm reading some interesting contributions, especially in France, by former Ministry of Economy, Bruno Le Maire, also pointing to a pragmatic, enhanced cooperation with fewer countries, which agreed on moving forward, because otherwise I think that in 2 years we will be debating again on the same topic we have today.
I mean, I totally agree. If I might step in also, like for a few considerations, that's one of the points, right? You touched upon the idea of coordination at a certain point, which might be to a certain extent slightly less than cooperation intended as we see today in the EU, but it might be very much needed also among those countries that wants to do more. This two-speed Europe, it used to be an old idea. I think also Enrico Letta at a certain point kind of proposed it, to have this to like, okay, let's keep the EU as it is for those that like it as this, but let's give an opportunity to those that would like to see more integration to move forward. And also I think to answer also your question, what he was saying about pan-European kind of projects and industries is crucial at a certain point. Like Spain goes into one direction, Italy goes into another one. Which one will pay more on the long run? It could be different. Of course, Azerbaijan might not be a reliable partner forever, and it's relatively risky, as much as Algeria. I mean, we are not importing gas from Germany, but the idea is, like, for instance, you could diversify at the EU level. So some could go renewable, some could go fossil, some could go nuclear, but then you lack the infrastructure to truly connect Europe and the EU. So that is something that we should work on, but we are seeing that this is something that national governments most of the time don't do. And we are seeing that with defense projects, where we have, like, Italy, the UK, probably Germany now, and Japan going one direction, and then at the same time we see France and Germany going another one, and probably Spain. I mean, it's all now some very crucial projects that should be at the core of European development. If we don't find an agreement on that, that's of course.
Yeah, if I can add also about the energy, I mean, it's so complicated. We all agree that we should move as fast as possible towards full green energy sources, and so of course solar panel, wind turbines, green hydrogen. But in practice, it takes time. It takes hundreds of billions of euros. It takes a lot to because we are in a democratic system. So you need permits. You need to discuss with local communities. You need an agreement. This takes years. The difference between Spain and Italy is that the energy mix is so different, and actually, paradoxically, what saved Spain from having an energy crisis, so for instance in the cost of electricity, was that the fact that the energy infrastructure of Spain is basically disconnected from the rest of the European Union. So the price mechanism, which pushed the price of electricity at skyrocketing levels in the EU because of the gas, because of the system, the way the price is done, did not apply to the Iberian Peninsula, because the Iberian Peninsula was insulated in terms of infrastructure. If it were integrated into the infrastructure, then the hike in the electricity price that we observe in Italy, in Germany, in the rest of Europe would have touched also the Spanish. So, not to say it's very complicated. The direction is clear. Unfortunately, there is no, at least at the moment, a clear agreement on the steps to take.
Okay, so it seems like it's the only two of us. So we are the last man standing. Maybe we try.
So
see which type of answer.
Last easy question.
Yes.
Easy.
Let's see.
Easy. Is it easy?
We try.
Let's.
Please.
Sure. So you mentioned a lot about innovation, economic development, the need for more financing, private and public. My question will be on a macro level. Europe has a lot of elements already there to finance innovation. Specifically, you have over 2,000 venture capitals, for example, over 600 accelerators, over 2,000 as well, institutions that provide PhDs. Lots of this research becoming commercialized as well. And yet, Europe seems to be lagging behind in terms of startups, for example, compared to the US. What do you think is missing, or how do you think Europe can change to make sure this is no longer the case, and how necessary do you believe it is?
I say easy question.
That was not the easy one. That was not the easy one.
Well, I think that the size of the capital markets for risky projects is there in Europe, but the size is nothing comparable to the US. So first is a lack of the mass of capital. It's true we have lots of savings in Europe, but the risk appetite of this capital is not the same. So we don't have funds of the same size, and also with this, I'm saying funds to invest in high-tech sectors, also with the capabilities to understand the sector, to measure the risk or to appreciate the risk of the startup, so which are able to screen effectively the opportunities the same way as the US. In fact, the most promising startups in Europe, they move to the US to find the capital. Typically not when they are startups, because in Europe now, in the last years, we have also in Italy, but incredibly, we are doing a lot in funding early stages of startups. And we also establish lots of accelerators, tech transfers, So I think that in terms of the ecosystem, the European Union is moving. What?
No, I was looking at the.
So it's moving in the right direction. The big problem is on the scale-up phases, where the mass of the capital needed to support startups to move into big companies is still lacking in Europe. And I think that one of the responses of the EU is the creation of this scale-up fund, which, as far as I remember, should start with 5 billion euro, which could become 10 billion euro. I think this is the right direction. But this is true. I mean, you touched a really good point. We are a continent where we have an excellent research. We publish incredibly well, also on top journals. The problem is transform scientific knowledge into products. Here is where there is a gap in the innovation process.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. And I think we can probably conclude this interesting session. I hope that you enjoyed the great discussion we had. Thank you.
Just want to say thank you all for coming, really appreciate it, and super thank you to all of you. Thank you, Dr. Romano, and Pacciani when he was here, and Giovannini and the moderator. You guys did an exceptional job. I learned very, very much. It was very interesting. I'm sure everyone here agrees. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.